they commit violent crime at a rate that's 135,000% higher. Let's compare two different cultures because it's such a good point. It's not so much about the race, the ethnicity, as it is the culture. There are 39,000 Japanese citizens who live in Germany. Can we agree Japanese people are not white, right? They're Asians, right? It's a different nation, different ethnicity, but a culture that is, I would say, incredibly honor-based, incredibly excellence-driven, right? Out of 39,000 Japanese citizens in Germany, 2 of them were ever suspected of violent crime in 2023. Now, there are 25,000 Algerian citizens living in Germany, right? So there's 30-ish% less Algerians than they are Japanese in Germany. But out of 25,000 Algerians, there are 1,729 of them who are suspected of violent crime in 2023. So they commit violent crime at a rate that's 135,000% higher than the rate that Japanese immigrants commit violent crime in Germany. So that's exactly the point. It's not the ethnicity, it's the culture.
Now, that right there is exactly how racists think and process information. To a racist, every difference, whether it's in crime rates, income levels, or education, must always come down to someone's race, their culture, or their religion. That is their default lens. But here's how a normal thinking person processes the same information. First, you ask, who exactly are these immigrants? What's the caliber of Japanese migrants that Germany typically admits? Are they mostly professionals, doctors, engineers, researchers, postgraduate students? And what about Algerian migrants? Are they largely people coming in for lower wage jobs like cleaning, delivery driving, or fruit picking? Next, you look at Germany's immigration policies. Maybe Germany actively recruits skilled workers from Japan, while Algerian migrants arrive mostly through asylum or refugee pathways, often without guaranteed jobs. Then you consider proximity. Japan is thousands of miles away, while Algeria is right across the Mediterranean. That means it's much easier geographically and economically for people from Algeria to seek asylum or migrate irregularly.
German lawmakers are pushing for tougher rules for asylum seekers coming from Morocco and Algeria, with plans to set up one-stop reception and deportation centres from which they could be quickly expelled from the country. The move comes as the government is being criticised for its open-door refugee policy after hundreds of women were robbed and sexually assaulted on New Year's Eve in Cologne. The change in attitude has been criticised by human rights organisations.
And finally, think about economic context. Japan's economy is far wealthier and more stable than Algeria's. So naturally, Japanese migrants are more likely to come from higher socio-economic backgrounds, while Algerians might be escaping poverty or instability. Now, there is also another huge factor that people almost always overlook: age and gender demographics. Crime statistics are heavily skewed towards young males across all societies. If one immigrant group has a younger average age and a higher proportion of young men than another, that demographic difference alone can drive up overall crime rates for that group. To actually assess crime rate differences accurately, you will need detailed statistical breakdowns that controls for these variables. For example, comparing the crime rates of employed university-educated Japanese men in their 40s to employed university-educated Algerian men in their 40s will give you a much clearer picture than just comparing the broad unadjusted totals. Now, I don't have anything against the Japanese. I actually love Japanese culture. But when people talk about culture as if it's inherently superior or peaceful, we need a bit of historical honesty. Because if we are going to talk about culture and crime, let's remember Japan has committed far greater atrocities in the war than Algeria ever has. Maybe Algeria doesn't have that level of military capability, but we will never know. What we do know is that people tend to have this warm, fuzzy teddy bear feeling about Japan because of this modern image, the technology, the efficiency, and of course, kawaii. That aesthetics of all things cute and innocent. But that is just one side of the story. People forget that Japan had a brutal samurai culture, a long-standing Yakuza mafia, and a dark history that shows how dangerous cultural glorification can be when it goes unchecked. The image many people have of Japan is one of technology, efficiency, and kawaii. But to truly understand the nation, we have to look past the pop culture and confront its darkest history, the era of Imperial Japanese aggression during World War II. The atrocities committed by the Imperial Japanese Army across East and Southeast Asia were not isolated incidents. They were a systemic campaign of terror that resulted in the deaths of estimated 3 to 10 million civilians across China, Philippines, Korea, and other nations. 1. Massacre and crimes against humanity. The most infamous example is the Rape of Nanking. In the late 1937, where Japanese troops captured the former Chinese capital. Over a 6-week period, they murdered, raped, and looted with unchecked brutality. Estimates of death toll range from 40,000 to 300 civilians and disarmed soldiers. Japanese soldiers conducted mass executions, bayoneting contests, and widespread sexual violence against women of all ages. This event became a symbol of the utter disregard for human life that characterized Imperial Japan's war machine. 2. The abuse of prisoners of war, PWOs. Japan's military culture viewed surrender as a disgrace, leading to horrific treatment of captured Allied and local soldiers. The Bataan Death March. In the Philippines, in 1942, roughly 75,000 American and Filipino POWs were forced to march up to 65 miles in brutal heat. The sick, the weak, or anyone who faltered was beaten, shot, or bayoneted. Thousands died from exhaustion, starvation, and execution. Allied POWs under Japanese control had a death rate of approximately 27%, 7 times higher than the death rate of POWs held by the Nazis. 3. Biological warfare and human experimentation. Perhaps the most chilling crime was the work of Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research unit in occupied China. Unit 731 conducted grotesque experiments on living human beings, including vivisection without anesthesia, deliberate infection with plague and cholera, and weapon testing. The victims were mostly Chinese, Korean, and Russian civilians. Biological weapons developed by Unit 731 caused the deaths of an estimated 200,000 Chinese civilians. The US later granted immunity to the unit's leaders in exchange for their research data. So when people try to frame crime rates as a reflection of culture or race, they are missing the entire point. Every nation, every people has dark chapters. And the Japanese example proves that even the most admired societies can be capable of unimaginable brutality under the right conditions. When you factor all of this in, the immigration policy, the economic differences, the age and gender mix, the types of migrants each country sends, and the realities of human history, the supposed racial or cultural explanation completely falls apart. This is what happens when you replace lazy racism with actual reasoning.